You're listening to the Break Podcast powered by Career Cloud.
I remember in 2022, I felt like I was coming off of what probably was my most productive, best year. I received a bonus that was below anything I had received in the prior 10 years. And it was a shock, but it was a signal. And within 10 seconds after learning that information, I said to myself, I'm not going to let this happen again, where all that work would not be able to be appreciated or fully sponsored. And that ultimately I can't hinge so much of my own happiness on something external, out of my control, and that could really set me up for this kind of level of disappointment. So it was a combination of all those things, a sudden shock from a compensation standpoint, years of thinking that I should be making a change.
This episode is sponsored by ZipRecruiter. If you need a change and are looking for a new job, or if you're looking to hire for your small business, please check out ZipRecruiter today. Their smart technology matches the right candidates to the right jobs and sends new opportunities right to your inbox. They make finding a job or hiring the right person easier than ever. ZipRecruiter, the smarter way to hire. Try ZipRecruiter for free today by going to ZipRecruiter.com and tell them I sent you. Paul, welcome to the show. Great to see you again. Thank you so much for being here.
Great to be here, Mike. How are you?
I'm doing great. Just to tee up this conversation for our audience, Paul and I met earlier this year, and Paul was actually a coaching client that I helped and worked with as he was going through some difficult decisions with his career and what he was going to do next. And so I wanted to have Paul on to talk about his transformation and his journey going through a lot of that. And then also be able to talk about what he's doing today, which is really, really interesting, and provide this episode, provide you guys with a little bit of inspiration and a story of how you can get from point A to point B with some of the techniques that we use. And Paul was a great guy and very willing to come and share with us. So Paul, thank you again so much for being here. I want to start the conversation with something really interesting. You and I met in a health and fitness forum, if you will, Dan Go's program. And what I didn't know about you at that point was, so this is what, circa, I guess this would be January of this year.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
You lost 50 or more pounds in his program. Talk to us a little bit about what that was like for you.
Sure. No, it was a journey for me, right? To be entirely candid, after the difficulties that came with lockdowns, that came with the, post-vaccine situation, I basically had my weight, go up to the highest levels that I'd ever had in my life. And I had always been somebody had been a little bit overweight, but I felt like my health was getting away from me. And I remember saying to my wife back in the early part of 2022, it's either now or never. I needed to get my health in better shape. And I feel as if I don't, I'm not going to be able to be the kind of father and husband that I aspire to be. So for me, I went about this a little bit, systematic, of course, expensive type of program to invest in my health, invest in learning about nutrition and exercise and committing to it. And it had to be a little bit expensive in order to foster accountability. But when I was able to do that, because I had bought into it, I was able to somewhat sustainably lose weight over the course of the next 9 months. There's a lot of tricks to that trade. It's not just rethinking things, but also tracking your progress. It's changing your daily routine. It's, kind of changing your identity as well, from somebody who doesn't think about physical fitness to somebody who's prioritizing it. So going through that transformation, it was a gradual process, but I can tell you, even after the first 3 weeks, even before I started losing a majority of the weight that I did, I felt as if there was a bit of a weight lifted off of my head in a way. I just knew that the steps I was taking were not only sustainable, but just providing some structure and really a system to be able to keep the weight off. And then after you start losing 20, 30 pounds, and, I went past my wedding weight and got into, frankly, the best shape of my life, it's just all gravy. And there's a lot of benefits that came from that, but it all started with that commitment to getting into the best shape of my life and doing it before it was too late.
Yeah, it's such a great story. And you and I have talked about this, how there's so many parallels between, getting your health in order and also taking control of your, what I call work life, what other people, call your career or whatever, getting that aligned and prioritized. There's so many parallels there. And we talk about, on this show, we talk about break moments, right? The moments that really catalyze us to action. So you talked about not being satisfied with your health and having a conversation with your wife, but is there anything more detailed that you could give there? Like, was there a moment where you were just like, this sucks and I'm at rock bottom here and it's unacceptable and I have to do something else? Or was it sort of like a gradual shift and then you just decided to take action?
It was more the latter, but I could say part of the catalyst was, stepping on the scale after Christmas in 2021 and seeing a number I hadn't seen since my peak days at the end of high school, and realizing that, wow, 20 years have passed and I'm this far away. And, my wife and I were expecting our third child. We had obviously, a lot going on in our family's lives. Of course, we all saw and felt a lot of the fear that came from everything that happened with the onset of COVID and lockdowns, et cetera. It's just, there are a lot of things that are kind of coming home to roost, right? So again, it was more gradual, but that probably the breaking point was stepping on the scale there and seeing a number that was just big and scary and made me feel as if I was losing control.
Yeah, it has to go past that threshold, right? And that whatever that number was for you, it went over that threshold and you said, all right, enough is enough. And I'm going to do that. And so that feeling, really parallels to a lot of people that want to make a career change. And so I'm going to segue a little bit, into your story with this. We sort of got to know each other a little bit in that program, and you reached out and said, hey, I need some help and some direction. I want to make some changes. And we started talking and working together. Can you describe a little bit for the audience what you were going through, sort of what you were feeling and why you sort of were at a point in your life where you felt like you wanted to make a change in the career choices that you had?
Sure. So for one thing, I should mention that I would have never had the confidence or the, I guess you could say, conviction in reaching out if it wasn't for getting something else like my health in order before reaching out. I really believe that was a major catalyst. It wasn't just because of, higher energy that came with it. It was just a clarity. I was feeling more alignment in, an area of my life, health and wellness, that more than I had ever felt before. So with that part of my life kind of better under control, or at least, being managed in a more optimal way, I felt like it opened up more mind space to actually tackle another complex problem, which for me was my career. And much in the same way with, my health and wellness, where I neglected it for so long, I neglected making a career change for far too long. And really at the core of it was the fact that I was fixated on one idea for what I should be doing in my career, because it was the one path that I chose, frankly, before even graduating college, and that I had invested so much time and money and energy in for so many years, that I had tied my identity to that. And untying myself from that and doing so in a way that would be somewhat graceful and not cause a great breakdown or any sort of other chaos for me personally was something I felt as if, I could use your advice and counsel on. And frankly, you were instrumental in helping me navigate that move once I decided to make a break from my prior position and go about what I'm into now.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So tell the audience a little bit about what you were doing, and how that, how the decisions, the feelings, what was it? What was the conflict and the turmoil? Were there moments? Were there what was that feeling like? I want people to really understand what it feels like at that moment.
And this is a tough question in terms of kind of digging into the weeds here, but I'll
Right.
try to be as brief as possible.
I know.
So for for helpful context, I grew up idolizing my dad, who's a financial advisor, and I always saw his job as being the most noble job in the world, right? Somebody who was a steward of his client's capital, somebody who helped invest that in a prudent, measured way, and somebody who could help, people and families ultimately achieve some of the goals that they have for their future success. I loved many elements of that kind of job and ultimately realized I wanted to do something like that, but frankly, wanted to do something better. And so I set out in college to become a stock picker and to someday become a portfolio manager, somebody who would probably be above a financial advisor in the whole Wall Street hierarchy, but could also make a ton of money. And so, I held tight to that idea throughout my early career. Ultimately took a couple of different jobs that helped further that view. But then as that journey went on, I ultimately burned out. And I realized that what I was doing, while it had many pluses and I worked with a ton of really smart people and I enjoyed working on some of the subject matter, ultimately I found it to be not entirely fulfilling. And so I made the decision in early 2023, this year, to finally make a break from that career. For me, you might say, delayed that for several years. I realized that there were things I did to kind of distract myself from making a change, from tackling that complex problem. Some of those distractions were welcome. Some of them were frankly important life events and things that were, genuinely joyous and things that were absolutely important to me and my personal development. But I stayed in a position where I wasn't feeling fulfilled for far too long. And that sacrifice and that, undying loyalty to this identity that I had created for myself many years ago was what was weighing on me for so very long. So at the end of it, it was basically, I was fixated on one thing. I had invested so much of my time and, energy and resources and, career capital into being this one thing, and realized pretty late that it's not what I should be doing. It's ultimately not fulfilling, and I had to make a change.
I have a few follow-up questions in here. I mean, I think it's the norm rather than the exception for people to look back and say, you know what, I stayed in my job too long. I think it's totally the norm that people kick that can down the road, right? So talk to us a little bit about those trade-offs or some of those distractions, as you call them, that you got into. I call it, like, I've done this and I just straight up lie to myself, right? We tell ourselves, we spin a story of why we should stay where we are. And if that story isn't aligned, we can only keep it up for so long. So what were some of those distractions and feelings that made you sort of procrastinate on this decision?
Sure. Maybe part of answering that, at least, is, and this is part of the work that you and I did to kind of peel back my identity, almost like the layers of an onion. Some of those layers for me, obviously I mentioned my dad, and, as I mentioned, he's a hero to me. I had high school teachers call me Wall Street,
right?
Because they kind of knew that I was interested in business. This was something I was, kind of identified with back in school. I had a great college experience, many friends, met my wife during that time, and all that contributed to the formation or the reinforcement of my identity. And then in my early career, both my first job, which I absolutely loved, working with a group of portfolio managers, earning the CFA charter, which is one of the most highly regarded designations in finance, and then ultimately becoming a research analyst. Those accomplishments all reinforce the same identity. So I had an awful lot of self-worth tied up into it. In terms of distractions and some of the other things that kind of went on during the time period, I would point to the fact that, during these years, like I said, I got married, bought a house, started a family, would do side projects around the house, maybe plan trips 3-6 months in advance, kind of put little things out there to almost be little guideposts to help me trudge along through some of the weeks where I felt as if it was just largely a grind and I wasn't necessarily advancing my career or furthering my curiosity and my growth. It's really easy to throw distractions out there. It's really easy to ignore and not do the hard work of thinking about what you're doing. It's also really easy, like you said, you talked about the narrative that you spin. One thing I was telling myself, probably unfairly, is that I needed to sacrifice.
Yeah.
Our home is a 2-income household. I needed to continue to provide for my family. I mean, that's my most important job as a husband and a father. So, what I later realized is you can provide in your family in different ways. It's dynamic. It's not just literally a paycheck. And sometimes actually staying static can limit what you actually provide to your family. So that was something, you helped me realize, and that's, made clear to me now. But for many years, it was just the ongoing narrative. I was telling myself, I need to sacrifice. This is what I'm doing. I'm paying my dues. I'm doing my share.
Right. So, you mentioned your dad, and you mentioned how you were, really on a one-track path, didn't really, have a lot of focus to experiment very early in your career. It was basically, Wall Street's my path. Kicking the can down the road. I mean, talk to me a little bit about how much, like, the fear of either letting him down or the fear of other people's sort of opinions, if you were to do something different, how does that creep into your psychology, and did that affect you at all?
It absolutely affected me. I don't know when it did per se. I've always been a pretty introspective and reflective person.
Yes, you have.
But at the same time, it's kind of always been there. I think for me, with each successive step I took along the path, it snowballed a little bit, right? You have more tied to it. You almost want to, prove it, you fake it till you make it, almost, is what comes to mind. And so there was a lot of that. And for me, I felt as if I was disappointing not only myself, but those around me who supported me through those early years of whether it's college, paying for college, out of college, getting on my own 2 feet, and then obviously through the early years of work. And I felt as if I made a change at that point, I would be selling myself short, and I would be, disappointing all of them.
Right.
All of that stuff came, and I would also say too, at least when I was in my early career, that was around the time of the great financial crisis. So there was another part of me that said, well, you're employed, you are doing what you can, hang on. This is a time, that you just need to be grateful for what you have and endure. So those are all elements that kind of contributed that narrative of sacrifice. So, whereas other people maybe weren't as tethered to their jobs or to their careers, I was kind of the outlier. At least I felt like I was, where I was completely hell-bent on staying in this one job, in this one narrow path, because it was all I had conceived of for myself. and it's what I had invested in.
You're listening to the Break Podcast powered by Career Cloud.
This episode is sponsored by ZipRecruiter. If you need a change and are looking for a new job, or if you're looking to hire for your small business, please check out ZipRecruiter today. Their smart technology matches the right candidates to the right jobs and sends new opportunities right to your inbox. They make finding a job or hiring the right person easier than ever. ZipRecruiter, the smarter way to hire. Try ZipRecruiter for free today by going to ZipRecruiter.com and tell them I sent you.
I can remember telling you the story of me early on, and this sort of warped idea that my first job was I was a futures trader in Chicago, and I remember distinctly sitting in my chair and being like, I'm going to die here or I'm going to succeed. And in my warped brain at the time, that was like completely okay. And now looking back, it's like, no, that's insane, right? Like I don't have to feel that way. There's a lot of other options a 20-something-year-old kid with a college education can do. You don't have to sit here and do this. And one of the interesting things, we have this idea that it has to be hard and we have to sacrifice. I think that's an idea that comes to play here. The other sort of, it's not really a mental model, but it's a fallacy that you're familiar with from the investing side of things that comes into play here is the sunk cost fallacy. And I think that really comes into play here where we are so invested in our career and we put so much effort and credentials and knowledge into one path that we think we have to keep going to justify that amount of effort. I hear this all the time with people I talk to, and that was sort of that is something that really delays people from taking a job. It's hard to come to grips with the idea that I can let this stuff go to get on a better path. So those are two things that I think I remember us sort of working through and talking about, just because you've put in X amount of, I remember framing it as an investment, like, you don't throw good money after bad, right? Like that's kind of like the golden rule of investing. But take me back one more time to this identity piece, because I remember this distinctly from our sessions as well. You talked about how you had an identity as Wall Street from a very young age, father, teachers, friends. And I can remember asking you the question of like, who gave you that identity? Do you remember how you answered that question? I
do. It was me. And I didn't realize that I did, but I did. It came over time. It came over those reinforcing experiences. It came also from, the sheer determination to get through the days and the weeks that were unfulfilling or were challenging. And ultimately, it was me that created that identity. I didn't realize how strong it became. And I also didn't realize how insecure I felt about myself, especially in the professional world, when that identity was threatened. And I would try very hard to, defend what I was doing almost in a certain sense, and justify it to myself, even though it wasn't necessarily something I had to do. I felt like a lot of times I was almost doing double work, right? Aside from actually doing my day job, I also was trying to, kind of tell myself, well, this is what you're supposed to be doing. This is how it goes. This is the price you pay. So, it wasn't what I've kind of realized. Again, you were very helpful in this, is you have to forgive yourself if something doesn't work out. You don't have to hold yourself up to this incredibly idealistic version of yourself, because you'll always measure up to that and you'll always fall short. And that was really a revelation for me, to understand that I was consistently setting myself up for disappointment because of this idealistic identity I crafted for myself, which hinged upon this one single career path. that my 20-year-old self chose for me.
Yeah.
So that's what I ultimately realized.
I can remember that conversation because it was such a big sort of, if I'm going to use consulting speak, it was such a big unlock for both of us, I think. And I didn't realize it at the time, but this idea that, do you really think it's fair that the 18-year-old, 20-year-old version of yourself should be tasked with getting it right for the rest of your life? And I just remember both of us were like, no, like that doesn't make any sense. So we have to forgive our younger selves, because at 18, what do you know? Right? Yep. You have more life experience. And then I think what that helps unlock in your 38, 40-year-old version of yourself is, okay, I'm going to forgive that younger version, but now I have some agency in this whole thing. I'm free of that path. And now I can start moving forward and making very conscious decisions. And so I think it sort of is a really interesting exercise to think about on both those levels, the forgiveness and now agency. Okay, move forward. This version of myself owes the next version of myself to get on the right path, which was really cool.
I couldn't agree more. I realize now that you owe everything to your future self, right? Who you want to become. Yeah. You don't owe anything to your former self, your younger self, whoever you just were. And that's something that I never fully anticipated or appreciated, really. And I ultimately realized that, being too fixated, again, also having really a fixed mindset about all of this was something that hamstrung my progress. So it's a cautionary tale. I'm grateful to have learned it at some point, but you owe everything to who you want to become, not who you just were.
I remember talking to you about fixed mindset and growth mindset, and I certainly view you as someone who has a growth mindset. And there were just sort of like a couple limiters, in there that we had to sort of get around. What have you reflected on that at all since you've gone on and kind of done some different things about what a fixed mindset is to you, or how it relates to your story?
A little bit. I would say that, at least in my case, a fixed mindset, what it embodies is this view that you have to solve everything yourself. Mm-hmm. You're on your own. You have what you've been given, then figure it out. And in a certain sense, it's almost like a parochial, almost like the way we're taught in school, right? We take, tests on our own. We're judged on our own. We do our own work. That's not how the real world is. That's not how life is supposed to be lived. It can be lived in a way that's forward facing. It can be lived in a way where you don't have to know all the answers. You just have to know maybe the next step to take, or in a lot of cases, more importantly, who to ask, as opposed to how to figure something out on your own. So, at least in my case, it was a reorientation to the world, right? Rather than beating myself up for not having all the answers and thinking, of my world in this fixed mindset, this scarcity kind of mindset, it was turning it on its face and realizing that in other areas of life, there is a growth mindset that I've adapted. Why can't I adapt it here? Why can't I look outward for directions, for help, for guidance, for ideas, for energy and momentum that myself couldn't do, or muster up internally? And the other part of this too, obviously relates to, not just your network of who's around you, but really what systems are in place, what structures in place to help keep you facing forward and help keep you advancing and thinking about who you want to become, as opposed to just dwelling on things internally that you can't change and just constantly beating yourself up for not being able to create the change that you ultimately want to see.
Right. Yeah, that's really well put. I like that. We went around your past and your identity. Now, you did something that I would say not a lot of people do. Probably in the minority of people go ahead and just quit their job before they know what the next move is. Can you talk to us a little bit about that thought process, how you decided that that was the right move for you, and that the pain of staying was sort of greater than the benefit of keeping that job while you figured things out?
Sure. There are two elements that really contributed to that, at least two. One is the fact that I was certainly thinking about making a change for a long time. Even if I wasn't acting on it, the thought was there. So that's one thing. A second thing is, and we can get into this in a little bit. I had taken some steps in the years prior. I'm a finance guy, a pretty numbers-oriented guy. I took a look at things from a savings perspective, from an income perspective, made some investments to help kind of, produce extra streams of income. Those sorts of things grew over time and helped provide a little bit more financial footing to make me feel comfortable that I could ultimately make a change, even if I didn't have the next thing figured out. And the third thing, which at this point, I thank God for this clarity, is, when you work in finance, an awful lot of your compensation can be tied to your bonus. And I remember in 2022, I felt like I was coming off of what probably was my most productive, best year in my job in terms of production, in terms of mentoring a new team member, in terms of just doing sheer work and good work too. And then I got I don't want to make this all about me, but I received a bonus that was below anything I had received in the prior 10 years. And it was a shock, but it was a signal. And I can tell you, sure to this day, within 10 seconds after learning that information, I felt a wave of calm come over me about what this is and what this meant. And I said to myself, I'm not going to let this happen again, where all that work would not be able to be appreciated or fully sponsored. And that ultimately I can't hinge so much of my own happiness on something external, out of my control, and that could really set me up for this kind of level of disappointment. So it was a combination of all those things, a sudden shock from a compensation standpoint, years of thinking that I should be making a change. And then during those, especially the last few years of considering that change, doing some things to maybe lay the groundwork for when I would actually make that change.
Love that, how you describe that feeling of calm. It's like that feeling when you kind of knew the decision had been made for you at that point. It was like the last nail in the coffin. So you didn't have to worry about, there's no more tension from that side of things. How did you think about your time frame to making a transition, runway, amount of money you had to do that? Like, how, you're obviously a finance guy, so you're very risk aware. I'm trying to give my audience a window into your brain as to how you thought about that type of variable.
Sure. With the understanding, of course, that, like I said, I had been thinking about this for a long time,
right?
And had been prudent in the years prior. I felt that sudden shock, like I said, in late January, and wound up leaving about 90 days later. So with that next 90 days, obviously I put forward, a good amount of work and production at work. I did want to kind of give a little bit of one last chance to see if the sea would change, if my view would change. Frankly, I had some projects I was working on that I wanted to continue to see through. But then also I felt like with that 90 days, that's enough time to really kind of adjust your habits too, to rein in spending, to think about, what's it going to be over the balance of the year. In my case, my my wife still works. So we would go from 2 income to 1, at least for a short period of time. But ultimately, I had enough savings lined up to get me through the next 9 months. That was, to me, the bogey. That was what I had to have, because I felt like within 9 months, I would be able to see and kind of distill down everything I had been through. I'd have a chance to explore what else is out there and ultimately find and work my way towards getting into something new. And frankly, I was right about that time frame. It took me 6-7 months to kind of really go from point to point. And there were a lot of twists and turns in between there. But having that savings, well, I guess you could say 90-day kind of head start from once I kind of mentally made that decision, and habit changing during that initial period, and then having enough savings to at least go 6-9 months. That was how I viewed it.
Excellent. So obviously this is a really big, complex problem to solve, figuring out what you're going to do next. And that comes with unknowns and uncertainty, which is kind of why you looked for some guidance. Can you talk a little bit about maybe some of the barriers to belief or the things that you didn't know how to do in this exploration process that you needed help with? Like what were you looking for from me or from another type of coach to get you sort of through this period and on the right track?
It's tough because I didn't exactly know what I was looking for, even as far as engaging with you or in any other sort of coaching or strategy program. It was more or less just thoughtful questions, mm-hmm. and kind of doing a post-mortem on where I had come from. And not only so I wouldn't necessarily repeat the same mistakes, but also just so I could feel comfortable and confident to the extent possible that, hey, this will work out. These are good ideas to consider trying out. Yeah. I was going from, I feel like I said it a million times, but I've gone from one narrow idea of what I should be doing in my career. Going from one to not one is a gigantic shift. Yeah. And I had done a lot of work and reflection to know that having more than one was really important, more than one idea to go down to, the path to explore. But having somebody to kind of consult on that, to tease out the assumptions, to think about what some of the risks are and what kind of, you might say, supporting work I should do as I kind of, wayfind my way. That's what I really needed. I'm reminded of one thing that we talked about that, hit me hard, really resonated with me and still does to this day. I remember when we were doing some of this exploration work and you told me, you said, you asked me, what's one of the best memories in my recent past? What's something that just fills me up with happiness when I think back upon it? And you took me, my mind back to a trip I took with my family to Greece the summer before. And basically, my family and I, we were driving across the island of Carpathos, which is this incredible, rugged Greek island with huge mountains and sweeping views of just the most beautiful beaches. And in order to cross that island, you had to navigate up this mountain. There were no signs. At some places, there were no guardrails. And really, at one point, we basically got lost. Eventually we found our way, but, as I was describing that drive and all the laughs that we were having in the car and just the, incredible views that we could see out the window, you basically said to me, you said, if one of your happiest memories was this adventure where there are all these twists and turns and moments of uncertainty, why can't your career be an adventure? And when you think about how I was oriented for so many years, and then you pose this very big, rhetorical, unanswerable question, it just hit me like a ton of bricks. There's no reason why my career can't be an adventure. I was trying to control for something that is inherently uncontrollable. And, I'm grateful for that conversation and that realization and leaning into embracing the fact that your career is supposed to be an adventure. It's going to have times of uncertainty. It's going to have some unexpected turns, but if it's your career and it's your story and it's on your terms, that's real, that's authentic, and that's something you can, have peace of mind about.
Yeah, I remember that conversation. I remember laughing about getting lost. And it's one of the unlocks that happens, right? People get tunnel vision. I look at it as a balancing act. My job is to bring somebody out of their tunnel vision of that one track and open up some possibilities. But immediately when they open up possibilities, their mind goes to shiny object syndrome and they're like, oh, I could do 1,000 things. How do I choose? Right. So we have to do this design thinking process where we diverge to see that we have possibility. And then we have some type of constraints or guardrails to remove options from us and converge around what I call high odds paths. Right. So I remember talking to you, and I think at the time you had bought a writing course, right? Because there's so many people online that are like, oh yeah, you should be a digital writer and all this kind of stuff. And you're already a great writer from all of the work that you've done. But it was like, I could do that. I could go do a whole bunch of different things. I could buy an existing business. I could just invest for myself. All of these things, but what are the high odds paths, and how do you make progress in investigating a couple of different paths at the same time? I think that's where sort of the magic of this exploration happens. And that was a really cool thing for me to watch you go through, going from the one track mind to then, editing out and coming up with, I think we really kind of had maybe 3 options for you. What does it look like medium term to get a job in real estate? What does it look like to start a fund? What does it look like to, come up with some partner arrangement? And then I remember the next steps we were talking about, what is the next step? And it was all around kind of networking, really, and relationships and things like that. And take it from there. So, you leave kind of my program and you go out to start your exploration, and we've kind of got you on this idea of getting into real estate, and that's where your passion was. And we aligned a lot of that. Talk to us about what that experience was then for you in the next few months and what that looked like.
Sure. There was a lot of iteration. That's the first thing. And like you said, you're going from one to infinite number of possibilities. So it was hard to channel that down. One day I would have this idea, I should go into marketing. Another idea, I should do something totally unrelated. Some of those things would be great for a day, 2 days, 5 days, but ultimately kind of proved more fleeting, right? So kind of channeling all that down was tough. One thing that I'm grateful for, that helped me throughout this process was doing the work, and it took time, but doing the work in terms of, kind of the mapping exercises that you proposed that I do and that we collaborated on. And, basically getting to a purpose statement, right? Getting to a purpose statement that helped me frame what is the purpose that I want to have in my career, right? Who do I want to serve? How do I want to, to serve? And then also, like you said, networking. At least in my case, when I felt so insecure about what I was doing previously and realizing that it's not something I ultimately wanted to do, I foolishly turned inward. I didn't network as the way I should. I just kind of put my head down and sacrificed. And don't get me wrong, like I said, I worked with some incredibly bright and great people, many of whom I still consider friends, but they were colleagues, right? They were not people I could confide in quite the same way that I needed to, that could offer new ideas beyond what I was used to. So, being comfortable in that outreach. And also, you mentioned design thinking, which is something I very much subscribe to. And at this point, I'm trying to employ more and more in my life. One of the elements of that is doing these little micro experiments.
Yep, exactly.
And, you don't really have a ton of things on the line. You're not investing huge amounts of money, but maybe you are spending a few $100 to go take a trip, do a meeting, do a class, do a conference. I kind of did one when I joined up with you to seek your advice, right? That was a micro experiment in and of itself. But ultimately, those experiments are investments in yourself. And that's critical. And the older I get, the more I realize that if you invest in yourself and you do it on a, in a grounds that's rational, and you do it in a not a crazy way, you're not spending all of your money on some, promise to make a better solution. Those investments can really pay off. So for me, it was kind of taking the purpose statement that we had crafted. It was, reaching out to individuals who are either in my network, beyond my network. It was going to tours, going to conferences, trying to just pick other people's brains about how do different, industries and how do different lines of work look. And then also thinking, at the end of the day, who exactly do I want to work with? How does that need to look? What's going to fold into the fabric of my family's life, so that what I'm doing next is not too disruptive or pulls me too far away from, my wife and kids.
How did the stars align? How did the experiments line up for you to eventually fall into what you're doing now? Describe how that went.
So some of this might be a little technical or a little detail oriented, but when you leave your job, one of the things you can do is you can take your money that's in a 401k plan at your employer, and you can take it away from that custodian and move it to a different custodian and create what's called a self-directed IRA. And as somebody like me who is an investor and a real estate investor, this is something I've long wanted to do. When you move a 401k, which usually is invested in things like stocks and bonds or whatever your company allows, to a self-directed IRA, you're given the option or the opportunity to invest in a lot of different assets that you otherwise weren't able to before. Now, why this mattered to me is I finally had the opportunity to invest some money in ways that I had not been able to before. And I had become a major believer in the power of real estate and real estate investing. So I wanted to take my self-directed IRA and invest it eventually into more and more assets. So one of the things I did, which came about, really the motivation came about after we spoke, was I went on an investor tour for a couple different asset classes. These are for investments in, whether it's a small business or self-storage. There are investor tours for multifamily investing, for industrial, retail, some other asset classes as well. But the one I did for a couple different investments, and this is back in the May timeframe. And when I was there, I was in this room of, call it 100 different investors. And I realized that all these individuals here were very much aligned with the way I think about investing in terms of goals, in terms of asset classes, in terms of ultimately striving for greater diversification, ultimately striving for financial freedom. That was a way of thinking that I had migrated to, that I had not been able to kind of tap into, but I finally had free license to proceed to learn more about it. So I went on this investor tour, totally hit it off with several others there who I now consider to be good friends, and realized that there is a rich opportunity of experiences and really opportunities as an investor in non-traditional assets and alternative assets. And that set into motion really kind of the purpose statement that we had crafted, which at least for me was to try to build a life of freedom, not only for myself but for others, financial freedom, and do it in a way that would allow me to actualize my abilities, to continue to learn, to provide for myself and my family, and to leverage a lot of the analytical and relationship building skills that I have. You helped me realize that what was really the only thing that was really constraining me was how fast I could learn and how quickly I could build my network. So actually getting out and doing those things, learning more and building my network, made putting that on paper purpose statement into life, and ultimately provided the inflection point and, provide the runway for what I'm into now.
So is it fair to say you, by kind of getting out of the building, running some experiments, getting out, putting yourself out there, you sort of found more ways to utilize your current skill set than you previously thought? Is that fair to say?
100%.
Okay.
And also doing it in a way where it's on your terms, meaning that you may think your skills apply in only one area. It shocked me how they can apply in different areas. In the world of investing, that might mean moving to a new asset class, or moving to a new way of thinking about investing, which is what happened to me. But that doesn't mean you couldn't jump from one industry to another. Sometimes you might say, are you a small fish in a big pond or a big fish in a small pond? Sometimes you don't know the size of the other ponds out there or how unique you may be. Whitney Johnson, who's a major influential thinker out there on career and, building your skills in your professional life, she talks about jumping to a new S curve. Mm-hmm. That's kind of what I'm speaking to.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think one of the things that holds people back and gives them some fear around this entire process is that they think they have to become something else. And I don't think that's true at all, which is why we do advantage mapping, right? We're mapping our own advantages and we're getting to understand who we are. And then the exploration is, how do we uniquely use that core in a new way? And I remember you, like a lot of our back and forth in the workbook and some of the commenting, a lot of your pushback was, well, I feel like I need more knowledge, subject matter expertise in certain areas. I can remember you saying that came up a bunch of times. And it seems like once you got out and did some things, you realize that, actually what I have applies in a different way. And I can continue to stack my expertise and continue to learn, but I don't have to wait. I can actually make a move now.
Completely. You don't have to know everything.
Right.
I was coming from a position where I was constantly dwelling on what I knew and trying to leverage what I knew, to now, again, kind of changing my view of the world to say, I don't have to know everything. I just need to know the next couple of steps, what that looks like, and who can help me. Don't pretend to have all the answers. You're not expected to have all the answers. To think that you do is pretty arrogant at the end of the day. But just to get out there and to have faith that you can and will figure it out, and that what you are capable of doing can be both, profitable for you, but also ultimately very fulfilling.
Excellently stated.
You're listening to the Break Podcast, powered by Career Cloud.
This episode is sponsored by ZipRecruiter. If you need a change and are looking for a new job, or if you're looking to hire for your small business, please check out ZipRecruiter today. Their smart technology matches the right candidates to the right jobs and sends new opportunities right to your inbox. They make finding a job or hiring the right person easier than ever. ZipRecruiter, the smarter way to hire. Try ZipRecruiter for free today by going to ZipRecruiter.com and tell them I sent you.
Let's tell everybody what you're doing today. So, a 9-month process or so, and you're off to the races. What are you exactly doing these days?
I mentioned that, in the years prior, I had all those, I sought out distraction as a way to kind of cope really with feeling unfulfilled at work or feeling stagnant or static. What I can say is not every distraction is always bad. I read a book that influenced me greatly and influenced many, many people, countless people. It's called Rich Dad, Poor Dad, right? It's a timeless book about financial independence, and it forever shifted my view of investments. A couple of years after reading that, I remember reading it back in 2017. I set off to actually go out and buy my first rental real estate property for investment purposes. And that created, now I have a few that generate passive income streams. So doing that on the side not only helped me take a step or two towards, well, ultimately financial freedom, but it also, again, provided some of the income that allowed me the time and the grace to make a change from what I was doing before to what I'm doing now. I ultimately believe that having more than one income stream is imperative. The cost of living, we've seen how crazy it's gotten, how much inflation cumulatively we've seen over the last 3 years, shelter, food, et cetera, up 20, 30, 40% in some cases. Diversifying your income streams is a very helpful thing to do. And frankly, something that I'm glad I started out in that process. So fast forward to today, I'm a registered representative with a firm called Cityside Capital. And what we're a small real estate private equity firm that helps investors gain access to passive income investing opportunities. We help investors, mostly accredited investors. We help them learn about some different alternative asset classes out there. Some of them I mentioned before: multifamily, self-storage, industrial, and other markets. And, learn about different strategies that are maybe not embraced or offered by traditional Wall Street firms or traditional financial institutions, but that can offer a range of benefits to investors, including, like I said, passive income opportunities, the potential for equity appreciation, tax benefits, and honestly, diversification away from your other investments, other paper investments like stocks, bonds, mutual funds, and ETFs. So being in that role today is allowing me to not only apply my new, over the last few years, view of how investing should work and what I'm ultimately striving towards, which is a life of financial freedom and greater creativity, but to do that in a way that helps investors also along that journey. I'm somebody was on Wall Street for nearly 20 years, and when you go back and include, internships and part-time jobs. So I'm well versed in understanding the rigors of analysis. I'm well versed in understanding the ins and outs of different investments and asset classes. And I personally find it to be a very vibrant area where, for a lot of folks out there, these investments could be solutions to some of their goals. They're not for everybody. Every investment has its own risks, and there's certainly some that come along with investing in real estate. But for me and many of the clients that I work with, they perform a vital role in their overall financial portfolio and achieving what they ultimately want to achieve.
So we're not a real estate podcast, we're not an investing podcast, but can you give us an example of how the strategies may differ, or what type of hole that your firm kind of can fill in an overall portfolio?
So to try to be as brief as possible,
yeah.
When you invest in real estate as an investment, you have a couple different ways traditionally. You have a REIT, which is a publicly traded real estate company. Those treated just like a stock.
Right.
You traditionally could invest in something like a property that you yourself manage, or maybe you hire a property manager to manage it for you, but you're still ultimately an active real estate investor in that regard. Over the last decade, there's been a growth in an asset class. I guess you could call it passive real estate investing, specifically syndications. What these are private placements where investors, typically accredited, can come in and provide capital to a project operator who's looking to execute a particular strategy that could provide benefits of current period cash flow, the potential for equity appreciation, and tax benefits, and, like I also mentioned, diversification. So those investments are private placements. They're usually illiquid, meaning that once you put your investment in, you're not able to get your money out for several years. But at the same time, too, it's a different asset class than investing just on Wall Street and something that's liquid. And with those investments, because oftentimes they're tied to real estate comes with it a very unique basket of tax benefits that are not typically available with publicly traded stocks or bonds. So in the whole scheme of investing, it's a different way to not only diversify your portfolio, but perhaps boost your current period income or save on taxes as it relates to some of your investments, so that ultimately you may have the opportunity to keep more of the money that you actually earn.
Got it. So if I were to restate, like if, a lot of people are interested in passive income and they think that real estate's a great investment for them, right? And most of the time their options are, I'm going to go buy a REIT, kind of a Wall Street product, or I'm going to invest in an income property that I have to manage or whatever. This is another way for somebody to take capital and get access to, not just like one, it could be a more diverse multifamily building rather than buying like a 2-lot, but also potentially access income and appreciation from, I think you said self-storage, and I think you said other small businesses that maybe have a tie to real estate. So there are different ways that you're not going to really be able to, somebody might not have the capital or the patience to go acquire, a self-storage unit. This is one way to do that. Is that correct?
Yes. For most of the investors that we work with, they're too busy or don't have the requisite experience or expertise to actually manage a real estate investment property. Either they're not familiar with self-storage, don't have the bandwidth for it. They've never run an investment property like an apartment building. There certainly are complexities there. So serving as a limited partner, you're providing capital, and that allows the syndicator to go and execute on their strategy with you as an investor. You're entirely passive, so there are no burdens on you from an operational standpoint. But of course, like I said, there are risks that come with these placements. Illiquidity is one of them. The potential, in certain cases, if there's great distress, to either have a capital call or to have, I guess you could say, a valuation of the building that comes back unfavorably. Those are certainly risks that come along, but just like risks that, we're used to experiencing in the stock market, where, stock prices, mutual funds, bonds, can all come under heavy pressure. So it's a broader diversification element to it, to your portfolio. And what I like about it as well is, I mentioned the difference between paper assets and real assets. Real estate is, at the end of the day, it is housing, right? In many cases, it is actual, real, hard assets. It's a very different asset class that has different drivers than a lot of those that you would experience or see or be subject to when you're trading stocks and bonds on Wall Street. So it's a way, passive investing is a way for individuals to get exposure to this asset class without actually actively operating a building or a self-storage facility.
Excellent. Okay, very cool. So what does the future look like for you, Paul? And I would like to, that's a general question. I guess maybe start with, what is it about what you're doing today that has you more aligned? Or, what were you missing previous that's got you excited today in this type of role?
Couple of things. First of all, I would say who I'm serving. In my prior role, I was largely serving institutional investors.
Okay.
I was serving hedge funds. I was serving, other Wall Street asset managers, big investors in terms of dollar amounts, but also Wall Street's a very, very, very much a dog eat dog kind of world, right? Can be very cutthroat. Now, in this new role, I'm serving individuals and small business owners and other investors who have goals that they're trying to achieve and are looking to learn more and ultimately gain access to investments that could help them achieve some of the goals in life. And what I found is a lot of those individuals have goals that are similar to mine. And the biggest one, of course, we touched upon earlier, is the whole idea of financial freedom. It's a concept that I'm a huge believer in. And then really I think everybody listening to this podcast in some way, shape, or form is a believer and wants financial freedom. And the question is just, how do you get there?
Mhm.
For many people, it just involves accumulating as much as you can and investing it in, kind of default assets like stocks or bonds. But there's also another way to try to work towards financial freedom. And that can be investing in other assets such as real estate, and ultimately trying to grow other income streams. For me, looking forward, it's not just financial freedom per se, it's really time is what I'm after and what everybody who wants financial freedom is after. To the extent that you can achieve financial freedom, it gives you back your time. It's not just the idea of, less time working in terms of years and maybe you can retire a year or two earlier, but maybe it's the idea of not having to work quite as many hours in your, variable, income type of job because you have other alternative sources of income coming in and that maybe they help you meet your needs. Maybe it allows you to have a little bit more optionality in your career. It's these kind of questions and complexities that affect us all in life. And I've become a big believer that you can help tailor your investments to what you really want in life and what those specific goals are, and not just adhere to the default thinking of, let's just save this money and not think about it for 30 or 40 years.
Yeah.
I think there's more than one way to build wealth. And being in this kind of position that I am now and working with the clients that I do, they embrace that as well.
Great. I love how you guys are fighting default, because that's what we do here too. We have to constantly fight the default scripts and the default programming that we have in order to align that future. So that's fantastic. Very, very mission aligned for you. I love where you've gotten yourself. It's amazing. Close us out with some rapid fire questions. I think you're prepared for them. Is that correct?
Yes, I am.
Right. I ask everybody this. So is there a recent author, thought leader, or influencer that you've come across that has really caught your attention and you think people need to know about?
One guy I would point to is a guy named Nick Huber. He's a relatively young guy on Twitter. He's at Sweaty Startup. He's an entrepreneur, a successful one so far, who operates self-storage, right? That's one of the asset classes that I help connect investors to. But he also operates several different adjacent businesses, in real estate, in talent management, for example. And I found that he gives really good practical advice on the realities of operating those various small businesses. It helps provide a lens into some of the entrepreneurial ups and downs. And he also happens to be a relatively young dad. So I certainly find him to be relatable in that way.
Yeah, I follow him, and my buddy Sean Sweeney knows him. My buddy Sean, who I've had on the podcast, who's a real estate developer up in Minneapolis, knows him. Yeah, I would agree with all of that. He's definitely a good follow. What book are you reading now or have read recently that has had a huge impact on you?
So I don't know if this has been brought up on your podcast, but I will try. I recently reread the book How Will You Measure Your Life by Clayton Christensen. This is a book that came out over a decade ago. And Clayton Christensen was a Harvard professor, world-renowned, and his claim to fame was disruption in the business world. And he wrote several books on innovation and disruptive trends. But toward the end of his life, he wrote this beautiful book, How Will You Measure Your Life? And it's all about the kind of questions to ask yourself on how to ultimately find fulfillment and happiness in your life and in your career. Benchmarking your progress is such an important thing to do in business and in your life. And this book kind of helps provide some of the questions and thoughts along that line. I read this book before I had kids. Now that I have kids, and now that I've seen all the ways that our society has been transformed over the last few years, this book hits far harder than before. So it's like a hybrid business book, life book, but there are some beautiful, eloquent entries in there that resonate with me, and I think would resonate with anybody who takes the time to read it.
I have read that book as well. I followed his work. Unfortunately, he passed several years ago. It's a great reminder for me to reread now that I have kids. That makes a ton of sense to reread. So thank you for that. All right. What about one piece of advice for someone just starting out, trying to get a foothold in this world, or maybe contemplating a similar, change that you've been through? Give us your best piece of advice.
So when I was thinking about this question, I was thinking about somebody who's just kind of coming into the workforce, right? Or somebody who's maybe starting over anew. And this is easier said than done, but my advice would be to find a way to invest in cash flow producing assets as early as possible, right? One example, of course, is owning a rental real estate property. But part of the reason I'm saying that is it's essentially starting a small business, right? Developing some of the skills and the experiences that come from operating a very small business, even if it's just a rental property, and trying to grow and hopefully ultimately succeeding in creating a second income stream. That is an incredible experience. And it would also just improve your options for whatever you do, even beyond that. If you get to a point in life years after doing that, when your primary work needs to change, or you ultimately desire more flexibility and control over your career, I think having some of these alternative asset income streams or alternative income streams, such as owning a rental property, or if you're able to invest passively in other income investments, I think those can be really helpful in terms of how you design your life. I ultimately think they can help enable professionals who are farther in their life to make more, how do I want to say, thoughtful decisions as to how their investments are working for them, and not just adhering to the default thinking that, I have to put it away and I'll touch it after I'm 65 or I'm 72 or whatever it might be. But I would encourage those who are just starting out and who are, starting anew, to find a way to invest in something that's producing cash flow, because the experiences are very rich and they'll help you no matter what you do.
Yeah, I love that as well. Forget the stonks. Go get something that produces actual cash, and learn to manage that cash flow and pick up those business skills. That's very good advice. All right, what's getting you excited about the next 12 months? You're on your new path here. What's got you really revved up for the next year?
I will say broadly, this is a tough question, because there's a lot of stuff that's happening in our world and in our economy that is very concerning. Yep. So I, to the extent possible, I try not to dwell on that because I can't control it, but it certainly does dominate my thinking more and more these days. What I would say gets me more excited is that, unlike in the past, I feel like I'm in a place where I can actualize on my abilities and my interests and do it in a way that helps expand the horizons of other people who ultimately want to take more control of their investments and really ultimately their lives. As I said, there's more than one way to build wealth, and a lot of professionals are unaware that there are investments like these passive income investments, and maybe they are a fit to help achieve their financial goals. So I think there's more than one way to build wealth, and I'm just excited to be able to, from a daily perspective, help educate others and hopefully connect them with things, or at least get them thinking about how they're looking at their lives, and empowering them to make decisions that work for them.
Excellent. I love it. Thank you very much. Paul, this has been a pleasure to catch up with you again. I am so excited for the path that you put your life on, and you've done it intentionally, and you've done the work, and you should be very proud of that. So thank you for going on that journey with me and doing it. Ladies and gentlemen, if you want to learn more about Paul, you can find him on LinkedIn, Paul, PaulDircks, and you can learn more about what he does at citysidecap.com. That's Cityside Capital. We will have all the links to this in the show notes. Thank you so much for being here. Any last words for the audience?
Nope. I would say just be authentic, live your best life. And if there's any way I can help or add value, I'm always happy to connect.
Excellent. Paul, thanks so much, man. Have a great rest of your day and have a great weekend.
Thank you. You as well. See you, Mike.